see the theory behind your force field.
It's very obvious.
If you're careful, you have supplies enough for 5 weeks.
A prime-time show left children watching people get swallowed alive, and nobody stopped it. Tonight we're going inside the episodes that made Space 1999 one of the most genuinely disturbing programs ever broadcast into American living rooms. The deaths, the dread, and the scenes that were never supposed to reach a 10-year-old Saturday morning. We're going to walk through a crew that found a dead version of Earth populated by their own skeletons. We're going to talk about 2 men who aged to apparent death on screen. And then, right at the bottom of this video, we're going to sit with the one scene that multiple television historians have called the single most frightening hour in television history. One character, one monster, a fate that doesn't end when you die. If unfiltered, unapologetic sci-fi darkness from the era that built you is your thing, subscribing means you never miss the moment we pull something else out of the vault that the networks hoped you'd forget. Let's start at the beginning, because before we get to the creature, you need to understand what kind of show this actually was.
What about the backup crew? Are they medically clear to fly this mission?
The surface. What parents and networks thought they were getting. Space 1999 arrived in 1975, carrying the best possible credentials for reassurance. It came from Gerry Anderson, the man behind Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, and UFO. It had sleek white sets. It had Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, recognizable, trustworthy faces from Mission Impossible. It had model spacecraft that moved with a quiet, expensive dignity. On paper, it was the British answer to Star Trek, optimistic, forward-looking, a celebration of human ingenuity punching out into a cooperative universe. The marketing presented it exactly that way. Moonbase Alpha was a beacon of professionalism. Commander Koenig was steady, competent, the kind of authority figure parents in 1975 were comfortable having in the room on a Saturday morning. Network executives saw the production values. They saw the cast. They saw the clean, white corridors. They made assumptions. Those assumptions were, almost immediately, wrong. This was the show as advertised. A family-friendly space adventure with good people solving problems in the cosmos. That version of Space 1999 existed primarily in the promotional materials and in the first 3 minutes of Episode 1. After that, the ground shifted.
They're no better. They're not gonna get any better, and you know it.
The reality, what was actually in the original, what Gerry Anderson and producer Sylvia Anderson actually built, was something considerably stranger and considerably darker. Space 1999 was, at its philosophical core, a show about helplessness. The moon has been blasted out of Earth's orbit by a catastrophic nuclear explosion. The 311 people on Moonbase Alpha are not exploring. They are adrift. They have no destination, no plan, and no realistic prospect of going home. Every episode begins from a position of fundamental, irreversible loss. That premise generated a specific kind of storytelling, one built on existential dread rather than adventure. The universe in Space 1999 is not friendly, cooperative, or even indifferent. It is frequently hostile in ways that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated by the heroism that typically defines the genre. Characters face psychological disintegration, encounters with things that should not exist, and deaths that arrive without narrative justice or satisfying resolution. The show was, in ways that were genuinely unusual for its era, honest about the idea that space might simply kill you. Not heroically, but strangely, helplessly, and without meaning or redemption. This was not the show parents thought they were leaving their children with on a Saturday morning. They thought their kids were getting Star Trek reruns. What they got was something closer to Camus in a spacesuit.
It's incredible heat, but still no radiation.
The gap, how the darkness reached the living room. Here is the curious thing about Space 1999 and American audiences. The show arrived through syndication rather than through a single network pipeline. That matters more than it might seem. Syndication in the mid-70s meant the show dispersed across dozens of local stations and markets, each with inconsistent content standards and gatekeeping. There was no single network censor watching every frame. There was no unified filter deciding what was too dark for Saturday morning. Instead, the darkness arrived wearing the show's respectable credentials like a disguise. Gerry Anderson's name meant Thunderbirds, something families trusted. The production design meant expensive, professional, safe. The cast meant established actors, not unknowns testing boundaries. So the darker episodes, the ones that probably should have triggered some alarm, landed in Saturday morning slots right beside genuinely soft programming, and the assumptions about what an Anderson production contained did most of the protective work. The psychological horror, the implied gruesome fates, the nihilistic conclusions, they all rode in on the back of that brand trust. And somewhere in that gap between what the show appeared to promise and what it actually delivered, a generation of children sat down expecting one thing and got something that would take them decades to fully process. The anchor moment we're building toward, it lived right in the middle of that gap. Keep that thought.
Want to find out why? Tell you what you can.
Moment 1. Black Sun, Episode 2. The Men Who Aged to Death. The crew encounters a black sun. Commander Koenig and pilot Alan Carter are caught in lethal radiation. The conventional television structure in 1975 carries its own implicit promise. The leads survive. We know this. The audience knows this. That is how the medium works. Except Space 1999 had other ideas. What the episode actually depicts is Koenig and Carter undergoing rapid, visible aging as the radiation does its systematic work. The transformation plays across their faces and bodies on screen, not suggested, not cut away from, but shown in clinical detail. They appear, in every meaningful narrative sense, to meet their end. The process is uncomfortable, unheroic, and filmed with a steady refusal to look away. There is no heroic sacrifice. There is no noble end. There is just two men watching their bodies fail them while waiting for a death they cannot prevent. They are later revived, but that doesn't soften what happened in the interval. Television in the mid-70s had a firm, unwritten contract with its audience. Lead characters in peril return intact, triumphant, and essentially unchanged. Space 1999 violated that contract in its second episode. Not the finale, not the mid-season turn, the second episode. Whatever reassurance the pilot might have built, Black Sun dismantled it immediately. These people can be broken. These people can appear to not make it. The universe in this show does not protect the protagonists, and the show has no interest in pretending it does. As an adult, the rapid aging sequence reads differently than it did at 10. What the show is actually depicting, two men watching their bodies betray them, is a specific adult fear dressed in science fiction clothing. Did you catch that at the time? Or did the revival at the end make you forget what you'd actually just watched?
What's this about a survival ship? Somebody going somewhere.
Moment 2. Another Time, Another Place. Episode 7. Your Own Skeleton, Waiting for You. The crew encounters an alternate Earth. The broadcast framing is inherently one of discovery. Another planet, another possibility, the chance of something extraordinary. The show's adventure structure invites the viewer to expect revelation, perhaps even hope. And then they arrive. What they find is a dead world. All life on this alternate Earth has perished. What remains, documented in source material and episode records, are skeletal remains, including the skeletal remains of the crew's own alternate selves. The Alphans look at their own dead bodies. They walk among the evidence of a version of themselves that did not survive whatever catastrophe this alternate timeline brought. The desolation is complete. There is no rescue, no exception, no survivor waiting in a hidden bunker to explain how it happened. Just evidence of a total, finished ending. Just the remains of who they might have been, already gone. This episode doesn't kill characters. It kills the idea of survival itself. It presents the crew with a mirror that shows not who they are, but what they become. The horror isn't a monster, or a weapon, or a hostile force. It's the quiet scientific confirmation that this is how it ends, and has, in one version of the universe, already ended. The skeletal remains carry an emotional weight that no dramatic death scene could match, because they require no performance. They simply exist. They wait. They are fact. What does it do to you, psychologically, to look at your own remains? The episode doesn't answer that. It asks the question and then leaves it open, hanging in the white corridors of Moonbase Alpha. That's not children's television. That's existential literature with a special effects budget and a Saturday morning time slot.
Did you know about this?
Moment 3. Dragon's Domain, Episode 8, Part 1. The Pilots Who Didn't Come Back. Dragon's Domain begins with a flashback. Tony Cellini, one of Alpha's crew, was part of an earlier deep space mission. That mission encountered something. The episode establishes this as backstory, the trauma that defines Cellini's character in the present narrative. But the backstory itself is where the darkness lives. What it actually depicts is a creature encounter in which multiple Eagle pilots meet a tragic end aboard their stranded ship. The creature, large, tentacled, a genuinely alien design that resists easy categorization, consumes them. The consumption is depicted on screen. The show relied on implication, sound design, and the reactions of witnesses rather than explicit gore. But the act itself is not removed, hidden, or replaced with a cutaway. The pilots are there, and then they are not. And the show makes clear what happened to them in the interval. Cellini is the only survivor. He carries this forward through the present-day narrative as a trauma the rest of the crew does not fully believe. The episode's structure means the audience watches him try to be taken seriously about something the show has already confirmed, for the audience, is entirely real. That gap between what Cellini knows and what his colleagues will accept is its own specific horror. He is not wrong. He is not unstable. He is simply a man who watched his crewmates get consumed by something that should not exist, and survived to be doubted by the people who should know better. The idea that survival can be its own punishment, that living through something monstrous might be worse than the alternative, is not a concept Saturday morning television typically explored. Space 1999 built an entire episode around it, and then built something darker on top of it.
I can't speak for the rest. but I care about dying.
Moment 4, Dragon's Domain, Episode 8, Part 2, Brian Blessed and the Fate That Doesn't End. This is where the curiosity loop we planted at the beginning of this video finally pays off in full. This is the moment that multiple documented sources, television historians, horror retrospectives, enthusiast archives, have described as the single most frightening hour in television history. Dr. Cabot, played by Brian Blessed, is not merely a victim of the creature in Dragon's Domain. His relationship with it is something the show constructs with a specific, deliberate cruelty that goes far beyond a straightforward on-screen death. Dr. Cabot is consumed by the creature. He is then resurrected by it, and then consumed again. The creature does not simply kill. According to documented source material, it feeds in a cycle, using its victims as a recurring source of sustenance, pulling them back from death to be subjected to the same fate repeatedly. Cabot's experience is not a single traumatic end. It is a loop. It is a prison. The show depicts his vivid, traumatized recounting of this process, the terror on his face as he describes it, and then, in the episode's present-day timeline, his actual return to the creature and his ultimate, final fate on screen. The depiction relies on Brian Blessed's performance. And Blessed, even at this stage in his career, was not a man who gave half performances. The terror reads as genuine because the commitment to it is absolute. He is not acting scared. He is enacting a man for whom the most fundamental human guarantee, that death ends suffering, has been removed. Source material describes the creature's almost casual approach to this cruelty. Not malice, not rage, but appetite, which may be the most disturbing element of all. The monster does not hate Cabot. It does not torture him out of spite. It simply uses him, the way a stomach uses food. The cruelty is incidental. That makes it worse. This is the concept of eternal torment, rendered in a 1975 syndicated television format. The specific horror, not death, but a death that resets, that repeats, from which there is no final exit, is the kind of theological nightmare that has haunted human storytelling since long before television existed. Dante understood it. So did the medieval church. And so, apparently, did Gerry Anderson in 1975. He put it on screen, on a Saturday, with good production values and a name British actor at the height of his powers, and sent it into American living rooms without a warning label or commercial break that could adequately contextualize what viewers had just witnessed. The creature itself represents something that most Monster of the Week television avoided entirely. A predator for whom the concept of mercy is simply inapplicable. It is not evil in any recognizable sense. It is not intelligent in any way that would allow for negotiation or appeal. It simply feeds and resets and feeds again. It is hunger given tentacles. It is appetite without consciousness. It is, in some fundamental way, worse than any conscious monster because there is no reasoning with it, no way to appeal to it, no possibility that understanding might save you. At 10 years old, you may have processed this as a scary episode. The creature was frightening, Cabot's fate was unsettling, and you moved on to the next thing. As an adult, the architecture of what the episode is actually doing becomes visible. This is a story about a man who cannot die his way out of suffering. That is not a children's concept. That is a concept adults spend significant energy trying not to think about, especially on Saturday mornings. Space 1999 handed it to you at 9 in the morning, and then cut to a commercial for cereal. What it means now. There is a specific quality to the discomfort that comes from revisiting Space 1999 as an adult with full knowledge of what you are actually watching. It isn't outrage. That would be too simple and too performative. It's something closer to retrospective vertigo. The show was exactly what it appeared to be. Nobody hid anything. The darkness wasn't smuggled in under cover of the white corridors and respectable cast. It was structural. It was philosophical. It was in the premise from the first episode, and it never let up. The question the show keeps asking, and never really answers in a comforting direction, is whether survival itself has meaning when the universe has no investment in your survival. The 311 people on Moonbase Alpha are not heroes on a mission. They are passengers on an accident, managing the consequences of a catastrophe they did not cause, heading toward a destination nobody chose. Every dark moment in the show's run grows from that root. Every episode is a variation on the same theme. What do you do when you cannot go home? What do you do when the universe offers no guarantees? What do you do with the time you have left when that time has no defined ending? What does it tell us about the era that this show aired on Saturday mornings without meaningful intervention? The record suggests that the gatekeeping was inconsistent, not because the darkness was subtle, but because the production values were reassuring and the brand was trusted. The censors, where they existed, appear to have been watching for explicit content rather than existential content. Space 1999 had almost none of the former and an overwhelming abundance of the latter. They looked at the clean white corridors and the respected cast and made the same assumptions the networks had made. They were wrong in the same way. The cruelty, and it is a kind of cruelty, even if unintentional, is that the show's darkness wasn't the kind a child could easily identify and categorize as scary. A monster jumping out is scary. You understand that. You know how to process it. Cabot's repeating consumption is something else entirely. The skeleton of your own alternate self is something else. The aging of the men you trust most is something else. These are adult concepts wearing monster movie clothes, and the child watching them doesn't have the framework to process them properly. So they go somewhere unaddressed, somewhere below language, and they wait. If you found yourself, years later, drawn back to Space 1999 without being entirely sure why, if you found yourself looking up old episode guides or tracking down which episodes hit the hardest, this may be part of the answer. The show planted questions in 1975 that the 10-year-old version of you couldn't ask yet. You didn't have the words. You didn't have the context. You just knew something was wrong. Something was dark. Something had reached past the Saturday morning barrier and found you. Now you can ask those questions. That is not a small thing. Space 1999 was sold as a family adventure about humanity's future in the stars, and what it delivered, consistently and without apology, was a meditation on helplessness, existential dread, and the specific horror of a universe that has no particular interest in keeping you intact. It arrived on Saturday mornings with expensive production values and respectable names and left trauma in its wake. The networks trusted the brand, the parents trusted the time slot, and somewhere in that comfortable assumption, one of the darkest programs ever produced for television walked straight into the living room. Which of these moments hit you the hardest when you came back to it as an adult? The crew standing over their own remains? Cabot and what the creature did to him? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and the answers to that question tell me where we go next. There are more episodes in the vault. There are more moments. There are more questions. The vault is open. Welcome back.